The so-called love triangle murder trial continues in Austin, Texas. This is Texas v. Kaitlin Armstrong, where the defendant is accused of murdering a romantic rival before fleeing to Costa Rica, where she dyed her hair and got plastic surgery on her face. On day 5, the jury heard from 6 more witnesses from the prosecution. They got to see evidence of Kaitlin selling her Jeep to a Carmax dealership shortly before leaving the country, and then they got to see some interesting search terms from Kaitlin's devices while she was in Costa Rica. Oh, and the defense moved for a mistrial. The judge dismissed that motion pretty quickly, however. As always, if you're new to this case, I have a whole playlist in the description below, so you can get caught up pretty quickly if you are interested. The court is only allowing cameras in the courtroom for opening statements, closing arguments, and the verdict, so we are doing recaps of each day of testimony in between, and we'll be live streaming the closing arguments and the verdict once we get there. And I am unfortunately behind in these recaps, but I'm going to try to make them a little bit tighter each time so that I can hopefully get them out a little bit faster and finally get caught up. Okay, let's dive into day 5. Remember that on day 4, the jury heard from Detective Richard Spitler, who was one of the lead homicide investigators on the case. Well, he came back on day 5 to finish up his testimony. Here he talked about some of the other people that he investigated, including Mo's ex-boyfriends, Gunnar Shaw and Alan Lim. In addition to being an ex-boyfriend, Gunnar apparently had a history of DV against Mo, which definitely should raise a suspicious eyebrow. However, as it turns out, both Gunnar and Alan had receipts showing that they were far away from Mo at the time that she was murdered. Gunnar was apparently 7,000 miles away and had airplane tickets as well as a rental car receipt to show for it, and Alan, at the moment that Mo was shot, was just landing at Austin Bergstrom Airport. In addition to this, Detective Spitler testified to some damning information for Kaitlin. First, let's talk about some of the digital forensic investigation. As the prosecution mentioned in their opening statements, the police managed to track down the Jeep that Kaitlin had sold to a Carmax dealership. And they were able to do a forensic analysis of the infotainment system of the car, which gave them the GPS location of the Jeep the night that Mo was killed. And they located it right where the prosecution indicated in their opening statements. Second, the police managed to get into Kaitlin's iCloud account. She apparently had a deleted notes folder, and one of the notes in that folder had the address of one of the homes directly next to Cash's apartment. And when was that note deleted? May 12th, 2022, the day after Mo was killed. Also, in the days that followed, Kaitlin apparently created a number of yoga-related email accounts. In these accounts, the police found email receipts for a number of things. These are including the sale of the Jeep to Carmax, a flight purchase confirmation from Austin to New York under Kaitlin's name, a flight purchase confirmation from New York to Costa Rica under Kaitlin Armstrong, Kaitlin's sister's name, a Surfshark VPN subscription purchase, and a NetSpend Visa prepaid card, which would allow her to electronically make purchases without having to use a credit card. And then it continues to get interesting. The police then looked through Kaitlin's search history from when she was already in Costa Rica. She apparently looked up her name, she looked up rhinoplasty, plastic surgery, she looked up things like, can pineapples burn fingerprints? And she searched, can IMEI be tracked if not making phone calls? Detective Spitler explained to the jury that this refers to a digital footprint, a way for a cell phone to be tracked. So the fact that she was searching for rhinoplasty while she was already in Costa Rica, for example, indicates to me that she wasn't going to Costa Rica for like medical destination travel. She wasn't going there already with the intent to get plastic surgery. She went to Costa Rica and then decided to get plastic surgery while she was there. And sure, maybe she's just a particularly curious person and wants to randomly know how to get rid of fingerprints. Or maybe she's trying to look for a way to change her fingerprints or alter the way that her fingerprints appear with things like pineapple juice.
Don't be suspicious. Oh, don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
John Ralphio?
So yeah, these search terms are definitely very suspicious and in my opinion, very, very damaging for Kaitlin. Now in cross-examination, the defense tried to dig into Detective Spitler's level of inexperience as a homicide investigator prior to this one. But honestly, this can't possibly have moved the needle for anyone on the jury. Detective Spitler showed that he investigated a lot of potential suspects around Mo, and the breadth and depth of evidence against Kaitlin is just so damn much. Now, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, the defense also moved for a mistrial, and that was during Detective Spitler's testimony. Remember when Colin testified about, hey, what's up? Okay, do you want Doritos? Here. Okay, come here. Come here. You know where you need to go. Okay, go. Go on. You know where you go. Okay. All right, where was I? Remember that Colin had testified about some acts of vandalism at the property in the days following Mo's death. Well, apparently the police didn't really look that far into it, but someone drafted up a report from Colin's complaint. And apparently no one provided that report to the DA or to the defense. And so on that basis, the defense asked for a mistrial. Like I said earlier, the judge denied this very, very quickly. Anyway, the best thing that the defense really did during Detective Spitler's cross-examination was to get him to admit that there's no hard evidence, there are no eyewitnesses, and there are no fingerprints at the crime scene. Would it be helpful for the prosecution to have all of these things? Of course it would. But do you think that they need eyewitnesses, for example, to pin Kaitlin as the murderer, or is there enough space here for reasonable doubt that it was her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, let's get to the next witness. You are such a goober. Later, okay? Let me finish this. Also on day 5, the jury heard from a witness by the name of Joan Gilchrist. Ms. Gilchrist is the owner of 68 Degrees Kitchen, which is directly across the street from Pool Burger. This is, of course, where Mo and Colin hung out shortly before Mo's death. Ms. Gilchrist had more surveillance footage for the jury. Her footage showed 2 people passing by on a white motorcycle at 8:16 p.m. And so this would serve as more corroboration as to Colin's timeline when he hung out with Mo and when he dropped her off. Anyway, the third witness was Nicole Mertz, a former professional cyclist and apparently a close friend of Kaitlin's in Austin, although the defense would have something to say about just how close of a friend she was with Kaitlin when they did their cross-examination. Nicole said that Kaitlin and Colin loved each other and worked well together, but that they were very often on and off. And weirdly, she said that they never actually called each other boyfriend-girlfriend. Anyway, despite that, Nicole said that she knew that Kaitlin had access to Colin's email and bank account and iCloud accounts because she actually saw Kaitlin access them on her laptop on at least one occasion. But she also testified about a conversation that she had had with Kaitlin about her relationship with Colin. In October 2021, Kaitlin told Nicole that she and Colin had broken up for good, but that they were still doing business together. So maybe it's not just Colin that saw things that way in October 2021. But Nicole also testified that in November 2021, Kaitlin was visibly angry when she saw Mo at Meteor, a popular cyclist cafe in Austin. And in that same conversation, when Nicole asked Kaitlin what she would do if Colin ever started dating another woman, Kaitlin said she would unalive the other woman. And Nicole further testified that Kaitlin also told Nicole in the same conversation that she had called Mo and told her that Kaitlin and Colin were living together and in business together. So we finally have a little bit of color as to what that alleged phone call was all about. Nicole also testified that when they were broken up, Kaitlin would date other guys specifically to make Colin jealous. So that's more corroboration of Colin's account of their breakup. Okay, so the next witness was Jacqueline Chasteen, another one of Kaitlin's friends. She lives in Bentonville, Arkansas, and is another person who was very involved in the professional cycling community along with her husband. Jacqueline's testimony basically mirrors Nicole's. On January 31st, 2022, Kaitlin and Jacqueline were in another Meteor Cafe, this time in Bentonville, because apparently there's a whole chain, and all of them are like popular cyclist cafes. Anyway, there, Kaitlin told Jacqueline that Colin had cheated on Kaitlin with Mo. Kaitlin said that they were already back together, but that Colin and Mo were still texting. Kaitlin further said that Colin was trying to keep Mo away, but that Mo wouldn't leave him alone. Obviously, we've heard a very different account from Colin himself when he testified about his relationship with Mo. But the most eyebrow-raising part of Jacqueline's testimony was when Jacqueline relayed that Kaitlin had said something to the effect of wanting to unalive Mo with a gun. Jacqueline couldn't remember exactly what Kaitlin had said, but she knew Kaitlin mentioned a gun, and she mentioned wanting to unalive Mo. At the time, Jacqueline didn't take it seriously because, let's face it, that's a common refrain that someone will use when they're very, very, very angry at someone. And it usually doesn't mean that someone is actually planning to act on it. But aside from that, Jacqueline testified that she did not know that Kaitlin had a gun or was even interested in guns. But Jacqueline said that once she heard that Mo had died, her first thought apparently was back to this conversation. Okay, so next the prosecution shifted gears a little bit by speaking with Keith Cox, the general manager of Carmax. Basically, there are 3 points here to talk about. First, the prosecution introduced more surveillance footage, this time of Kaitlin waiting in the lounge to wind up the transaction of the sale of her Jeep to Carmax. Second, the appraisal offer for the Jeep was was written out to Kaitlin, but the form had no last name. If this was a normal sale of someone's vehicle to Carmax, it would seem that someone would be very careful to make sure that their last name is actually on the paperwork. So that is a weird and suspicious detail. And speaking of weird details, the endorsement on the back of the check that was made out to Kaitlin was initially written, "Pay to the order of Kaitlin Armstrong," but then Kaitlin Armstrong was crossed out and replaced with Kaitlin Armstrong. So this seems to indicate that she was at this point putting together a plan for how she was going to escape the United States by starting to refer to herself by her sister's name in these various transactions. At least that seems to be the framework that the prosecution is trying to establish for the jury to use in order to understand all of these events anyway. Anyway, then the jury got to the final witness of the day, and this is Brian Bell, the vice president of global communications for Strava. Remember that Strava is the app used by many cyclists and runners to track their routes. I will say I found this choice of witness just a little bit odd. It makes sense to have someone come from Strava, of course, and this is not to say that I found any faults with Mr. Bell. I'm sure he's a perfectly capable guy. But the reason for calling him, of course, was to talk about the data and the ways in which Kaitlin allegedly stalked Mo through the Strava app. So for that, I would have much rather heard from, say, the head engineer of Strava, who could really get into detail about this kind of stuff. That said, my guess is that the reason that Strava sent their VP of Global Communications instead is probably because he's competent enough to talk about the data and to explain all of this, and may actually be better at explaining things to a jury than someone like the head engineer. Because when it comes to witness testimony like this, you need someone who not only has the knowledge to be able to testify properly, but who has the ability to talk to humans and has the ability to connect with a jury. And sometimes, especially with engineering types, that's not necessarily always the case. Anyway, Mr. Bell testified to the user creation dates for Colin, Mo, and Kaitlin. Colin's been a Strava user since 2012, Mo since 2014, and Kaitlin since 2018. They also showed a number of Excel spreadsheets, including one showing user IDs and whose profiles they were accessing.
Spreadsheets.
So they were able to basically go through all of this data and explain to the jury that a Strava user can request information from someone else's Strava profile. If you remember from a previous recap, I definitely had some questions as to how someone could access someone else's profile and their information through Strava. So I'm very glad that they actually did bring someone from Strava to explain all of this data to the jury. And so here, Mr. Bell walked the jury through all of the evidence showing that on May 10th, 2022, as an example, Kaitlin accessed Mo's profile 6 times. She also apparently accessed it a number of times on May 11th. And on at least one occasion, the data shows that Kaitlin not only requested to view Mo's profile, but that she requested to view a specific ride that Mo took and further clicked through to zoom in on the map of the route. And that's basically how they ended the day. That is definitely something to leave the jury with overnight for sure. At the beginning of this trial, the prosecution in opening statements indicated basically that they were going to essentially bury Kaitlin in receipts here. And so far, that is how it's looking to me. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more trial recaps like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next one's uploaded. See you in the day 6 recap.